السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the universe, the Master of the Day of Judgment. I bear witness and testimony to the oneness of Allah, to His magnificence, His omnipotence, His might, His glory, to His being the God of Adam and the God of Abraham, the God of Moses and the God of David, the God of Jesus and the God of Muhammad. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon all of His chosen prophets and upon all those who choose to tread in their paths until the last day. It is said that there was once a young man who deeply cared about his family. But this young man, he had a wife that he was very much in love with, and they had a young son who was an infant child who was the object of their adoration and affection. And one day comes about that this young man, his own mother passes away, and his elderly father is so frail, he's so fragile, he needs someone to look after him, so he moves into his son's home. And when this elderly man is now living in this young man's home, his needs need to be met every single hour of the day, and it is this young man's wife who has to look after her father-in-law. She begins to become irritated and agitated that she has to constantly supervise and take care of him, and she lets her husband know that I am always looking after your father, I am always looking after his needs, can't you do something about him? And the young man, he says nothing. And then one evening they sit down to eat their dinner, and this elderly man, he is so fragile, he is so frail, he is at such an elderly age that when he is holding the plate in his hand, the sheer weight of the plate is too much for him to handle. It drops from his hand onto the ground and it shatters into pieces. And the woman, she says to her husband, the young man, that look at what your father has done now. He can't even eat off of the plates that we eat off of without making a mess. Can't you do something about this? And so the young man, he speaks to his father and he says, from now on, you will sit at a different table than my wife, my son, and I. Since you cannot eat without making a mess, you will no longer be able to eat with us. And since you can't eat off of the same plates that we eat off of without breaking them, from now on, you will eat from this wooden bowl. And the elderly man, with a tear in his eye, he goes to his place and does what he is told. The next day now, this young man, he comes upon his own son. He comes upon his own child. And he's playing on the ground with some scraps of wood. And he wants to play with his kid. He wants to participate with him. He wants to be with him. And so when he gets closer to him, he says to him, Ya Ibni, oh my son, what is it that you are doing? And the young boy, reciprocating the same adoration and affection for his father, says to him, Ya Abi, oh my father, I am making a wooden bowl for you to eat out of when you get older. That the manner in which we learn is both explicit and implicit. The individuals that we are today are most definitely shaped by each and every interaction that we have the benefit or at sometimes the misfortune of engaging from every day that we live prior to today, and we will most assuredly keep growing based off of every interaction and engagement that we have for every tomorrow that we see. And for many of us who are young and we are Muslim, who have grown up in this country, even those of us who are older and we are Muslim, our understanding of our Islam and the way we learned it came in a similar fashion. That our identity, both religious and otherwise, came from and was shaped by those individuals that we engaged and interacted with, growing up both here and in some instances abroad. And so for people in my generation, in my demographic, those who are trying to understand Islam and what it means to be a Muslim here, most definitely many of us were taught in Islam growing up, but it wasn't necessarily one that made sense where we were at. My father, he is an immigrant from Pakistan. He came to this country in the 70s as a doctor. My mom came with him as well. And when he came here, he sought to engage people who happened to be Muslim, but more often than not, they were from a similar socioeconomic background than our own. They were doctors who were Pakistani. And when they sought to teach us Islam, they sought to teach us an Islam that they grew up with, that they were socialized with. And again, it most definitely made sense, but it didn't make sense here. Because we weren't from there, we were from here. And so we had to understand and define and develop one that understood that which was both culturally normative within the context that we were growing up in, but still adhered to something authentic and was respectful of that which was religiously normative in our tradition. When I was about 12 years of age, and some of you might have heard me tell the story before, my brother and I, we went to Pakistan to visit my grandmother. And at 12 years of age, I looked very different from what I look right now. I had very long, kind of Pantene Pro V hair. I was wearing baggy jeans, and I'm wearing jeans now too, and I apologize, but I left my suit pants at home running to Syracuse. I was so excited to be here and leave Manhattan that I forgot half of my suit at home. But there's a podium in front of me, so it's okay, it's blocking my jeans. And I was walking through the streets of Pakistan with my brother, who was 18, and I was wearing baggy jeans. I had on some Timberland boots. Over my hair, there was a white baseball cap backwards. I didn't have a beard at that time. I was only 12 years old. And as we were walking through the streets, there was a young boy who was probably about 5 years of age, who was wearing a more cultural attire, what we call a shalwar kameez, that was mint green tea colored. And he started to look me up and down. And as I got closer to him, he started to check me out even more profusely. And when I was close enough to anticipate what in fact he would do, he arched his head backwards and screamed on the top of his lungs to everyone who was listening, "Okay, Michael Jackson aage, that Michael Jackson is here." And then he and his friends started chasing me up and down the street because they thought I was Michael Jackson. And I'm definitely not Michael Jackson. And 15 years later, I can think back and laugh about the situation, but more importantly, when I reflect upon it, I didn't fit in where my parents came from. I didn't really fit in the country that they were born. And when I tried to fit in here, it didn't really always happen that easily, so I didn't really know where to go. I didn't really know where I fit in or where I would be understood. And so the natural progression that would take place is one that many don't necessarily embrace. It's not that you would hide your identity or say that now I will go to a place where assimilation becomes a prevalent characteristic of how I engage the society, essentially just giving up everything of who I am and suddenly turning into what I believe people want me to be. But more importantly, defining an Islam that makes sense in the context in which we are in, and seeking to integrate, offering that which is beneficial for my tradition, not only for the benefit of my people who are Muslim, but for my people who are all American, that I'm a part of that society. Cultivating and crafting one that was respective of the cultural imperative that existed here, while simultaneously took into consideration those authentic sources that were valuable and essential for the establishment of something that could definitively be called Islamic. And this is what a lot of the work that I do is about, where many young Muslims are very conflicted because they're trying to fit into a culturally hegemonic attitude at times of what the generation before them tells them they should be. And at the same time, they're trying to make a critical sense of how do I fit in just with my friends and the people that I engage in, and I don't seem socially awkward or weird. And then thirdly, how does it make sense in terms of my religious identity? And what it ends up being is people get really confused. And then today we add in the variable, the factor that at least where I come from in Manhattan, you have institutionalized presence
of organizations whose mission statement is to just hate Islam. And we can't mince words on this. It's not a narrative that's victimizing itself, but it's one that deals with reality. It's one that says that this is what we're facing right now, this is what the actuality of the situation is. There are people in this country who just don't like Muslims. We have political parties that are most viable political parties. There are real political parties, such as the Tea Party, that issues official statements on a regular basis that says, this country is a Judeo-Christian country, we should expel Islam from its shores. We have individuals who base their political campaigns and their platforms off of an anti-Islamic rhetoric. They are able to say, we will get into office by being able to combat the construction of mosques, by saying that religious symbols such as a headscarf or a long beard should not be in the public sphere, that we will be able to be your champions by keeping Sharia out of your neighborhoods. And then when you ask them, what is Sharia? They say, I don't know. But for the Muslim who's trying to figure it out, they have to be able to say, our fears are substantiated as much as those who don't really understand us. I work a lot for our administration. Outside of my role at New York University and the New York City Police Department, I do a lot of work with the State Department. I've done work with the White House Office of Public Engagement, with Homeland Security. There's regular interactions with the government. And at this point, when I travel anywhere internationally and come back into my country, I don't even make it to the passport check line. The announcement goes up on the airport, on the airplane, ladies and gentlemen, have your passports ready. TSA workers are doing random checks, because I'm the random check. And when I get out the door and they see my passport, two men waiting right at the door of the plane, they say, we found him, the rest of you can put your passports away. And when I go into the place, and I've been there now about 14 or 15 times in the last year, and everybody knows me and they say, oh Khalid, you're back again. And I'm like, yeah, I'm back again, man. They say, why do we keep stopping you? They pull out my brochures, they pull out my credentials that have big gold eagles in the middle, the symbol of our State Department, of our country. They look at my police badge and my ID card, and they say, why are we stopping you? I say, I don't know. And then one guy, when I asked him, after a few times of being in there, why do you think that they're stopping me? And he says, well, you're young, and you're male, and you're Muslim. And those are three things that right now don't go very well together in terms of many of our security policies. In the last 2 months, it wasn't only international things, but now even domestic travel, I get stopped. That when my boarding pass gets printed, in 2 different places, there's 4 S's, and it signifies rather, you're a security threat. When I went to San Diego last week, I guess the airport there is really small, and they've never dealt with somebody in this way. So the person who was checking the boarding passes, when she saw the 4 S's, she said to the guy next to her, what am I supposed to do? And he said, I don't know. And then they said, let's call a supervisor. And the supervisor came, and they took out a flashlight, and they started looking at my driver's license. And then she called another supervisor, and he started looking at my driver's license, and they said, we don't know what the problem is. And I said, you know, I don't mean to interrupt, I have to catch my flight. The problem is there's 4 S's on my boarding pass, and I'm a security threat, so do the secondary screening so I can go home. And they said, oh, thank you for letting us know. That's very helpful. And when I sat the first time, the gentleman was very nice as he can be. And he said, sir, we're going to go through your belongings, and then we're going to give you a pat down. And I said, okay. And he said, we're going to rub our hands, and I apologize if it sounds grotesque, I don't mean for it to, but this is what they said. We're going to put our hands all over your body, and when we get to your sensitive areas, such as your buttocks, we're going to use the back of our hands, And in the inner part of your groin, we'll use the back of our hands as well. Are you comfortable with this? I was like, what do you want me to say, man? Am I comfortable with this? I'm like, yeah, please do it. If I say yes, I'll look like I'm some weird, like, I don't know what. If I say no, they'll just add on another S to my boarding pass and I'll never go home. And then they see my badge. And then they say, you work for the police department. I say, yeah, I do. And they say, why are we stopping you? And I say, I don't know. Why are you stopping me? And it becomes a problem. I'm a little bit more pompous and cocky than most. And when I go through it, I understand my role and my responsibility, not just to my community, to my society. But there have been times when I have gone into those rooms and there have been women who are very, very old, women who are impregnated, women who are in places where their children are standing, watching them being tested in these ways. Today, when I was coming into Syracuse and they sought to separate me from the line, as opposed to telling me to stand on the side, there was a glass box that you could see everything from the outside in, and they said, you wait here. And I'm thinking, all these people who are getting on this plane with me, what are they going to think of me? And if I was a young man, and my mother was in this glass box, and everybody was staring her down, how would that make me feel? I already feel isolated, I already feel alienated, I already don't know how to fit in and belong. How is this helping me? We need to think about this because the normative understanding of Islam right now that is prevalent in much of the media and many politicians are seeking to put out there is one that equates Islam to being normatively understood as something that is radical. But the actuality of the situation is that this is the farthest thing from the truth. Alienation does not yield radicalization. Alienation breeds more alienation. You make somebody feel as if they are marginalized and you push them to the fringes, they're going to keep feeling like they're at the fringes. And so many young Muslims find themselves in a place where they're turning to outlets that are not healthy. They're looking to drugs, they're looking to alcohol, they're looking to all kinds of things that no one in society should be forced to turn to because people tell them they don't belong here. Where else am I going to go? Where else should I grow up? Where else should I be? And this is a problem. The narrative that exists around Islam equates us to something that is rooted 500 years in the past or something 500 miles away. Islam has existed in this country for years and years, since the time that Muslims were brought over as slaves during the slave trade. We have a rich heritage that is rooted in the African American experience. We have many individuals who came in with a recent influx of immigrants that came here as white-collar workers. The problem that existed was that these communities tended to be very insular, very ethnocentric. They didn't even let other Muslims into their communities. They weren't talking to each other. Why would they be talking to anybody else? And we feel the ramifications of it right now. We feel the repercussions of it now. When we sought to engage based off of ideas of ethnicity and culture, we saw commonality within socially constructed differences, where the beauty and depth of Islam actually lies in the transcension of these socially constructed differences. Now we're feeling the pain from poor decisions. It's not that the society doesn't welcome us. We don't know how to reach out to the society. It's not that there's a prevalent narrative that is there that's saying we're radical. It's that we're not supplying our own narrative to counter it. We don't let people into our mosques. We don't let people into our community centers. Many of us don't even feel comfortable going into them. Why would anybody else? And this is a problem. And we have to start to deal with it. They say, how did we get to a place where we can overcome some of these obstacles? The most basic thing that any of us can do is start talking to people who are different. start understanding the reality of their narrative and of their experience, and start to understand that the blessing and benefit of this country lies in an embracement of its diversity, not pointing a finger at it and saying that we have to get rid of the diversity to deal with the issues that exist within our society. And Muslims can be the catalyst for many of this. If you are a Muslim and you are in this room, you have to think about, what do you do to change the narrative? How do you utilize your Islam that it is not thought of with an individualized sensibility that says that it is something for me and it is something that is private? But what do you do to highlight to society that you being a Muslim is something that is beneficial to them? How will anybody understand the narrative that exists around us to be anything that is different when we're not telling our own story? You have a very, very small percentage of people who just don't like us because of our faith. And you have a very, very small percentage of people who like us because they just love everything. And then you have this huge demographic that's in the middle, that's curious and has questions, and it's going to take its answers from wherever it can access those answers. And so when they turn on the television and they see all kinds of things, they're going to get an answer from there. And when they go on the internet and they read all kinds of things, they're going to get answers from there. And when they go to a university with you and they try to attend your MSA activities and they're dealt with in the way that potentially they might be dealt with, either positive or negative, they're going to get their answers from there. If they see you and they understand you to be a Muslim and they associate your existence with setting a precedent for Islam in their life, then you understand that when you lie and you cheat and you break promises and you dispose a character that is not prophetic in its nature, they don't care if it's you, you're exemplifying an entire population, 1 billion strong for them. But if you set a different precedent, then they won't believe the other narrative. An article came out that was written by a rabbi in California. And he said that we invited a Muslim woman to our synagogue to speak about Islam. And this woman, she was a doctor, and she said that I have over 1 billion patients in the world, and she was referring to the Muslim community worldwide. That Islam needs reform, Islam needs change, Muslims are in all kinds of problems and issues. And the rabbi writes, I wonder if up the street there's a mosque where there's a self-loathing Jewish woman who's talking just like this woman. And he says that this woman will not ever set a precedent for me because she doesn't know my Muslim neighbors who look after my kids when my wife and I want to go out. Or that when my wife was sick, they came and they gave her soup and they made sure she was doing well. They set for me an understanding of what Islam is, not this. And that's how you change the narrative. That's how you change what people understand. You have to think about it broadly. You have to think about it more in a larger scale and broaden your perspective on what society really needs right now and how you can fill those voids. The biggest issue that we have is that we have people who are not qualified in positions that they should never be in. They're making comments and judgment calls on things that they are not skilled to do. You are in a university, you are in an institution of education that's qualified as being higher in nature. You are smart people. Go out and use your intellect to bring benefit to the society and change people's stereotypes that they have of us. People don't think Muslims are good. How do you counter this in the most simplistic of ways? Go out and do good. What do you do for people? What do you do for society? And understand that there are combating ideologies within us. It's not just that the kind of combat that we have come from the outside and we blame those who are not like us for everything that is our problem. We've got to take a look on the inside. There's a woman from Somalia by the name of Hawa Abdi. Some of you might know her. Hawa Abdi last year was named one of the Women of the Year by Glamour magazine. This woman is a Muslim woman. She wears a hijab by all of our understanding. Stereotypically, she's practicing. Hawa Abdi received her medical education from Russia way back when Somalia and Russia had some good relations. And Many of us know the history of Somalia and where they are right now. Hawa Abdi came into a place where she got her medical degree and her training, and she brought it back home. And she saw that there was a need for care for her people, so she set up her clinic. And when the government collapses in Somalia, her clinic becomes that much more important. She had her training as an OBGYN, but then at that point, she made an active decision to say, any disease that has a cure, we will take in people who have that disease. Acres and acres of land this woman owned. She set up her clinic upon it. You had thousands and thousands of families who came from all over the country to literally live on her land. 90,000 patients this woman had. And in Somalia, you had competing ideologies. It's not the same. They have pirates there, if you can imagine this. Like real pirates. And so a group called Hizbul Islam that practices what's called more a quote-unquote hardline ideology came into her clinic one day. 750 men armed came up to this elderly Somali woman and said, we have decided that women should not be in positions like yours. Give us your clinic. She says, no. Why would I give you my clinic? And so these men, they take control of this clinic and they take this woman captive. An uproar takes place internationally amongst Somalis as well as people just in the international community, and pressures come upon this organization, Hizbul Islam. They begin to relent and give a little bit back, and they say, fine, you can run your clinic, but we're going to tell you how to run it. And she says, no. Why would I let you do that? What have you ever done for society? They have no answer. As much as they have what they believe is an interpretation of our religion, as much as they have their backing and their manliness and their arms and all of these things, not one of them can say we ever did anything for the benefit of society. So they leave her clinic, but not before they tear apart her operating room. And so this old woman, who's quoted as saying on her own website that, at times I feel really tired and I wish I could do something else. She now has to go to raise money to rebuild because people rely on her. But she doesn't stop. She changes perceptions. People are in awe that this is a Muslim who's doing this. They're also in awe that it's a Muslim woman who's doing it. And they recognize her, and she's motivated proactively through her identity. And she's not doing it because it's convenient. She's doing it because she knows it's her responsibility. And even when stupid Muslims try to take it away from her, she says, no, you are wrong. And I'm not going to let that be an obstacle in being able to do that which is right. We have to start to think critically and deeply about our tradition and really begin to think about what we offer back to the society that we're situated in. The purpose and the implementation of Sharia itself is to increase benefit and reduce detriment within a society. And where it's not doing that, and where we see it completely as black and white and just regurgitated information that's not really benefiting anyone, especially us as practitioners of it, we got to start rethinking. You're going to be a doctor and you're a Muslim, utilize part of your degree and your credential and your expertise to start providing free health clinics and services to the society on a whole. You're going to be a lawyer, provide some free legal clinics. You're going to be working in finance or as an accountant or as an educator or in any field, do something for people. That's how you're going to keep your faith alive, and that's how you're going to keep people in a place where they understand us a little bit better. People are beyond the idea of sitting in presentations that say Muslims pray 5 times a day, we fast during Ramadan, all of these kind of things. They jump at the opportunity at being able to see just very, very little about us that makes us human. At our center in New York University, we regularly are doing events and engagements with media outlets like Time Magazine, Newsweek, CNN, BBC, NPR, all over. During Ramadan, they come one after the other with camera upon camera, videotaping us breaking our iftar. I sat with one journalist and I said, "You guys really don't have anything better to report?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I was like, "All you're doing is taping us eating." But that's where we are. People are intrigued by the fact that we consume food. If you can imagine this. We have no other stories to offer. We have no other experiences to share. We have nothing else to do to highlight to people why we are in fact Muslim. Use your skills, use your intellect, use your credentials. This is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ does. Unqualified, unconditional, he serves the Meccan society. People treated this man like garbage. He saw his companions be beaten and boycotted and abused, even killed some of them. They sought to turn him out and cast him away. But he understands that mercy and compassion are the motivational forces that are catalyzing him towards doing what he is doing. He doesn't seek retribution or say, "These people treat me bad, I'm not going to do something for them." There's a woman who stands with him, an elderly woman, who is speaking ill of him and speaking down to him, or rather about him, not knowing who he is. She needs help carrying some things that are with her, and while he carries them for her, she says, "Have you heard about this man Muhammad who has come into our community? He does these things, he says these things, he separates us in these ways." She's speaking ill upon him to his face. Whenever she asks him, "Who are you?" he changes the subject. Until they get to the end of their journey and he gives her that which he is carrying for her, and he can't avoid it anymore. He says, "I'm Muhammad." And she's just so taken aback. Not from his knowledge, not from his reciting of verses or tradition or anything, but how he lives, his personality, his character, the way he engages. He lives his Islam in a very real way. Another man would throw garbage upon him day in and day out. And one day, the garbage doesn't fall from the window that is part of this man's home. And so the Prophet, he goes to inquire what was happening. Why didn't the garbage fall today? And the man, he's lying sick in his bed. And he's expecting to be mocked and ridiculed because this is how he treated the Prophet Muhammad. But that's not what he's sent to be. He's not meant to be burdensome or obnoxious or condescending. He's not meant to be someone who seeks vengeance or retribution or justice for himself, but he seeks to act justly with others. And so this man is ill, he needs care. The Prophet provides care for him. And again, the people, and this person in specific, is just taken aback. Why would anybody think good of Islam based off of how you have presented it to them? You might not have presented to them a bad narrative. Have you presented to them any narrative at all? As much as there are individuals who don't want us to be here, there are many more who are here on our behalf. I live in New York City, I live in Manhattan. I live about 25 blocks away from the ground zero site. On September 11th in 2001, I was in Manhattan when the World Trade Center went down. In the immediate aftermath of that day, there was many churches and many synagogues and many other houses of worship that opened their doors up for sanctuary to Muslims. But there weren't many people, Muslim or not, who were saying Islam is something that should be here in the United States. There wasn't a voice that was out there that was speaking on our behalf. This last year, when we saw this media frenzy and fiasco over the Park 51 Masjid, the quote-unquote Ground Zero Mosque, you saw people who just turned it into the biggest news in the world. And in New York, it was interesting because no one in Manhattan really had a problem with this place. You would go down there, and there was a bar right next to it, and people would go in to pray, and there would be some drunk college kids being like, yeah, we support you. And Muslims would be like, yeah, all right, thanks. But nobody had a problem. It was the same people who stopped that mosque, or didn't stop it but caused problems for it, that just go all over the country, stirring and antagonizing and causing issues. And when they tried to do it this last time in Manhattan, there was definitely people who utilized the opportunity to vilify us. But there was also individuals who were celebrities, entertainers, politicians, activists, and academics who on their own volition said, no, Muslims have a right to be here. And that's a sign of growth. We have to understand strategically and critically how the power dynamic functions in this country. Muslims for a very long time equated wealth to power. And this was a huge, huge mistake. Because wealth does not equate to power. It just doesn't. Many Muslims don't understand how ethnicity works. Many Muslims don't understand how privilege works. And they started to get a wake-up call about these things. They started to understand the importance of coalition building. They started to understand the importance of really engaging society. And they understood where they stood on the power spectrum. And many still don't get it. And we can't cater to the needs of people who don't understand. In the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, if you see an injustice, you should act against it. And if you can't act against it, you speak against it. And if you can't speak against it, you pray about that thing, and that is the weakest form of faith. This hadith does not tell us that we implement it without really thinking about the consequences of our actions. Because in Mecca, Muhammad was not in power. He saw his companions who were following his teachings that he told, if you do what I'm telling you, you will have not only good in the next world, but you'll have good in this one too. Again, beaten, boycotted, and abused in front of his eyes. And he can't do anything about it. But he has to have patience and he has to have wisdom in his foresight to understand where he can be and how he needs to get there in the most sensible of ways. After they migrate to Medina, the Prophet, after years of building his community and building a certain balance in the power sphere, he now sits down at the table with people from Mecca. They engage in a treaty that's called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, where they make deals. One of the things that they do, the Muslims are on their way to make pilgrimage to Mecca. These were men and women who for years had left their home, their belongings. They had a desire to go back and be there. And the Prophet made a deal that we won't go this time. And many of the companions were really, really upset. Umar ibn al-Khattab, who was the senior companion of the Prophet, he says, "Alasna bil Muslimin wa laysu bil mushrikeen," that are we not Muslim and are these not mushrik? Why are we making deals with them? He goes to Abu Bakr, who's a close friend and companion of the Prophet, says the same thing. And Abu Bakr says, "Relax, don't you think he knows what he's doing?" Umar and the companions didn't agree. They felt frustrated and agitated, but leadership does not mean you do and function at the whims of people who don't really get it sometimes. You have to know where to compromise, and you have to have strategy and vision. And there's going to be some things that people won't get. You still have to do them because they're in the best interest of the people. And some of us just don't know what's good for us. After he makes this treaty and doesn't go to Mecca on that day, then years later, they get to a place where the treaty is broken. And the Prophet, with more than 10,000 people, come to Mecca. And the Meccans, who mistreated and abused this man and his companions, are fearful that they're going to come, take back the city, and pretty much obliterate all of them. When the Prophet comes in, he doesn't come in seeking vengeance and retribution. He is rahmatan lil alameen. He's a mercy for the worlds. So most assuredly, if he had done it, nobody at that time would have questioned him because of the way they had treated him before. But when he comes in, and he is now in control of the power dynamic, he walks in and he takes the city and he says, today everybody is forgiven. The home of so-and-so who did such and such, they are forgiven. The home of so-and-so and such, they are forgiven. No bloodshed, no warfare, none of this. Because he's got a plan, and he's patient in that plan. And he understands that it's not about complacency or short-term satisfaction, it's about contentment, and that takes patience. The situation is hard for us right now. But part of the reason why it's hard is because we're not really doing everything that we can sensibly to deal with it. We have to put aside many of the insecurities we have in engaging and dealing with people who are different from us and really think about where we want to be in the long term. And all of you play a role in this, whether you are Muslim or not, because this is an issue that is confronting us on a societal level. The onus of it lies within the Muslim community, where we have to come up with solutions to deal with some of these problems and these obstacles. But where we can partner with our neighbors and our brothers and our friends is that we help them, and in turn, they will also help us. Not with a sense of indebtedness, but with a sense of appreciation, with a sense of gratitude. The Prophet ﷺ, he says in the hadith, that you will not enter paradise until you believe. And you will not believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah, who is a great scholar in the Islamic tradition, he is most widely noted for a collection of hadith that is called the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. And pretty much Muslims across ideological and theological schools of thought respect this man and his work. He says the word brother in this tradition is not in reference to your brother in Islam. It's not in reference to your brother in nationality or culture. But the word brother is in reference to Ibn Adam, the children of Adam. All of humanity, all of mankind. Unconditional, unqualified, you help because you help. Not because the hand that's reaching out to you matches you in skin color. Not because it's from the same culture or it's from the same country of origin as you. Someone's in need, you help them. Because that's what Muslims are supposed to do. And then we start to get out of this rut. Think about what you do for people. Think about how you change the narrative where you have control over it. And don't undermine the ability, the impact of affecting even one individual. There's a story that I tell often about a young man who was a known author in his community. And this man, when he wanted inspiration for his works, he would go out into nature to gain that inspiration. And on one day, he's walking down the coast of a beach, and as he's walking down the shore, he sees a figure in the distance that looks like it's doing some kind of dance. And so he gets intrigued, he tries to walk closer, and when he gets even closer, he sees that this figure is not dancing, but it's picking up something from the ground and throwing it into the water. When he gets even closer, he finds that upon the shore, there are thousands and thousands of starfish. And there's a young boy picking them up and throwing them into the sea. And so when he gets close enough to engage the boy, he says, "What are you doing?" And the boy says, "I'm throwing the fish back into the sea." And the author, he says, "Why are you doing this?" And he says that the tide has brought them upon the shore, and if I don't do it, they will dehydrate and they will surely die. And the author, he looks up and down, and all he sees is fish. And he looks to the boy, and he says, there are so many of them. There are so many of them, you surely will not be able to accomplish what you are seeking to do. What is the point of what you are doing? What difference will it make? And the young boy, he looks at the author, he looks to the ground, he picks up one of the fish, throws it into the sea, and says it made a difference to that one. If you can change one heart, it makes a difference. If you can enable and crush a stereotype in someone's mind by shattering their expectations that they have based off of preconceived ideas and notions, then you have made a difference. But until you get up and start doing something, don't expect somebody else to do it. Because why would I do anything if you're going to just sit down and watch me? You have a skill, you have a credential, you have something to offer, give it back to society. The kind of fulfillment that you get from helping, empowering, and enabling others will give you satisfaction unlike anything else you've experienced. You won't find it in wealth. You won't find it even in companionship or friendship. You'll find it in a solace that you helped make something easier for somebody else who is in need. And it'll give you a sense of self-esteem and self-worth that's unmatched by pretty much anything else. And any of us can do that. Any of us can be in that place. And God forbid we find ourselves in a situation where we are in need, as many Muslims today are, and nobody comes to help us because we never really did anything for them to give them a reason to think that they should. We can change the narrative. We just have to start working at it more strategically with a well-thought-out plan. Utilize your resources. Think about where there's an absence of certain institutions within the Muslim community, and think how you can dedicate your life to building those institutions. And I realize that I'm talking a lot, and I have a tendency to do so. And what Azhar had told me was we could have an opportunity for question and answer. And I realize also that some are going to go to pray the Maghrib prayer. And so inshallah ta'ala, I would end by just saying that if at any point I can be a resource to any of you, feel free to reach out to me. I live in Manhattan, I work for NYU and the NYPD. If any of you are ever there, you get a parking ticket or something, let me know. I'll help you out. I can also park my car anywhere, so feel free if you need a ride or something. Probably not all of you though, some of you, or maybe all of you. But really, that's the way we need to start working. And so if you think there's certain things here that I can help with in terms of strategy and other things, then definitely please reach out. But we have to start being resources to one another, and we have to start plugging in sensible individuals into roles that they are actually good at. The most religious person is not the best leader. They're just not. And we can't think that that's what becomes a criteria for empowering somebody to do work within our community. How do you engage somebody's religiosity? There's no way for you to even understand what exists in their heart. So we have to use our best senses and put people in places that they make sense. And inshallah, if there's any way that I can help in any capacity, feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to do what I can. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and protect us. May He bless us with knowledge that benefits us. May He bless us with the tawfiq to understand and implement that knowledge into our daily lives. And may He guide and bless us all. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.